Little Phoebe mentioned to me that she hasn't met her dad. So I took little Phoebe in the hallway, and she explained that her father had alcoholism. I gave Phoebe my email and my cell phone. And I said, if you ever need me, you contact me. Little Phoebe's 14 years old. She came back for the night presentation and she introduced me to her best friend, Ryan. Ryan was 152 days sober at the time, and she was so proud of him. I have my arm around Ryan on a picture on Instagram. He posted that I was his recovery hero. I never heard from Phoebe again until Mother's Day. On Mother's Day, I was sitting in TF Green Airport waiting to fly out on a late flight. And Phoebe sent me a text, the text that Ryan posted on Instagram. But the iPhone was moving still, so I knew something else was coming. And right underneath it, she said, Mr. Heron, thank you for all you do. But we found Ryan hanging from a tree in our local park today. At 15 years old, Ryan lost his battle to mental illness. I feel personally connected to Ryan because I wish I could have done more. Over the last 5 years, I've shared my story 250 times a year. I've spoken in front of groups like the Patriots, the Bears, the Packers, Harvard, West Point, Yale. But sometimes the story isn't enough. On June 4th, 2008, you could find me on a street corner in Fall River on a day just like this. On June 4th, 2008, I was 32 years old. I was in the fight of my life. I was battling my addiction. At 32 years old, I was a father of 2 beautiful children and a wife who was 8 months pregnant. And on June 4th, 2008, I got a phone call from a kid I went to high school with who said, Chris, if you come down to Fall River, I'm gonna throw you 4 bags of heroin for free. So I jumped in my car, I drove, I parked on a side street, he threw them through my window. At 32 years old, I shot my heroin. And at 32 years old, I felt the overdose coming. This will be my 4th. And I said, there's no way I'm gonna die on this side street from 4 bags of heroin. So I started driving. I don't remember, I was found 2 miles away, crashed into a cemetery fence. The cemetery that Lizzie Borden was buried in. The cemetery that I grew up 2 blocks away from. 20 minutes later, I woke up in the hospital in handcuffs, and I was told that I was just brought back to life. 20 minutes later, I was being discharged by the doctor, the medical staff, and handed back to law enforcement. As I'm walking out of that hospital in handcuffs, the police officer said, Christopher, you've had a tough enough day. I'm gonna uncuff you and I'm gonna summons you. Promise me you'll check into a treatment center. I said, absolutely. He took my handcuffs off, he handed me my summons, and at 32 years old in Fall River, Massachusetts, on a day just like this, I was walking out of that hospital and I said to myself, if I'm gonna do one thing right with my life, I'm gonna walk to my friend's house, I'm gonna grab his gun, I'm gonna stick it in my mouth, and I'm gonna blow my head off. Today I will kill myself. Today I will finally end this nightmare. Not for me, for my poor family. And as I'm walking out of that hospital thinking about suicide, I hear this nurse yelling my name, asking me to come back. When I turn around, she was in her 50s. I waved her off, I kept walking, and she said, Christopher, please don't wave me off. I went to high school with your mother. My mom died at a young age. I said, ma'am, no disrespect to you, but please don't bring up my mom. She said, no disrespect to you, but your mom is talking to me right now. She's begging me not to let her little baby leave this hospital. And please try and get her little boy some help. You were born in this hospital, Chris. Let me do your mom, my dear friend, a favor. I turned around, I walked back in, I sat with this nurse and cried my eyes out at 32 years old, listening to her be rejected by treatment centers all over New England. So that nurse made me a bed and kept me for as long as they could. And on day 8, I was being discharged, and as I'm ready to walk out of treatment, still going through withdrawal, my phone started ringing. And when I answered it, it was a woman by the name of Liz Mullen. Liz Mullen was married to Chris Mullen, an NBA legend. She said, "I know this story, Chris, and I want to give you a gift. I just paid for you to go away to a treatment center in New York. Will you please take it?" At 32 years old, I was out of gifts. So at 32 years old, I took it. I jumped in a car and I drove to this place I never heard of in Rhinebeck, New York. When I checked in, they told me for the first 30 days I could have no contact with my family. On day 30, nervous and anxious to make the phone call, I walked into that office to call my kids. As soon as I walked in, they handed me the phone. On the other line, it was my wife. My wife was broken up. She was crying. She said, "I don't want to get into this right now, Chris, but I'm going into labor today. I'm all by myself in the hospital. Do you think you can come home for the birth? I'm scared." When I was pronounced dead on the side of the road, my wife was 8 months pregnant, expecting our 3rd child. I looked at my counselor and I said, "Can I go home?" He said, "Bad idea." I said, "Sir, not for me. For my wife." That counselor called me a taxi, and 4 hours later, I was in Women's and Infants Hospital to witness my 3rd child, little Drew, come into this world as a sober dad, my first birth as a sober father. I was so proud of that moment. I ran into our room, I rocked him and stared at him for 8 hours. 8 hours into it, a nurse comes in. She said, "There's 2 little ones coming up in the elevator. They can't wait to meet their little brother. Little Chris is 9, Sam's 7. They come flying in." Little Chris sits down on the side of me. He looks up at me and he says, "Dad, do you think I can hold him?" I wrapped little Drew up tightly and I placed him in his arms. I walked up to my wife, I gave her a kiss, and I said, "I've been in this room for 8 hours. I'm going for a walk. I'll be right back." I never came back. The moment was too big for me. I walked out of Women's and Infants. I walked up to a liquor store. I bought just a little vodka. By the time I got back to the hospital, I finished the bottle of vodka. I called my drug dealer. He picked me up and I was gone. Just 30 days earlier, I was pronounced dead on the side of the road. 30 days later, I'm back on the streets. The next morning when I walked into Women's and Infants Hospital, my wife was sitting up in bed crying with the kids. She said, "Chris, I can't tell you how many times you've broke my heart, but this is the last time I let you break theirs. I called the police. They're on their way. If you stay, you're going to get arrested. I don't want our kids to see you in handcuffs. Say your goodbye because you're never coming back." At 32 years old, I got down on my knee. I looked into my children's eyes and I said I was sorry. That was the first sorry that I knew meant nothing to them. At 32 years old, I turned my back on my family and I walked out of Women's and Infants Hospital knowing I had failed at everything in life. But at 32 years old, I knew there was only one place that would take me. So I jumped back in the car and I drove to that treatment center in New York. When I checked in, the counselor who told me it was a bad idea to go home, he said, "Mr. Basketball, I just got off the phone with your wife. I heard about your home visit. Come in my office." I said, "If you heard about my home visit, I lost my family." He laughed in my face. He said, "Lost your family? Of course you did, Chris. That's what alcoholism and addiction does to families. Be in my office at 10 o'clock tonight. We're going to turn this thing around." At 10 o'clock sharp, I knocked on his door. He called me in. As soon as he saw me, he flipped me a cell phone. I caught it. He said, "Now, Mr. Basketball, you're going to do the most courageous thing you've ever done in your life. You're going to flip that phone open. You're going to call your wife. And you're going to promise her you'll disappear. Tell your wife you'll never contact her again, Chris. And then tell your wife to tell your 3 beautiful children that when their daddy said goodbye in the hospital this morning, that their daddy died in a car accident. From this day forward, we're going to play dead for your children. And we're going to let them live. Because Chris, you know it and I know it, you're 32 years old. You're a no good scumbag junkie who has no business being a father. That broke me and I started crying. I said, sir, I've been calling myself that for 10 years. I know who I am. And I know I have no business being a dad. But it's too late to call the hospital. I'll be back in your office at 7 a.m. I will play dead for my kids. I walked out of his office on what seemed to be the worst night of my life. I walked back to my room in that treatment center. And amongst 12 men, I walked up to the edge of my bed. I dropped to my knees and I started praying. That day was August 1st, 2008. By the grace of God, and one day at a time in my life. August 1st, 2008 is my sobriety date. I thank God every day for that man's words. I thank God every day for the bad days. The bad days are just part of the journey. And I wouldn't be who I am today if I didn't experience them. Over the last 5 years doing this, I wanted to be unique and different. I wanted to tell my story, but I didn't want to preach to kids. And I thank God every day early on that I learned a lesson. When I walked into a high school in Rhode Island, and in the front row were these 4 little beautiful kids in purple t-shirts. During my presentation, I wondered who these 4 little kids were in purple t-shirts. At the end of the presentation, I got an answer, because at the end of the presentation, this little girl in a purple t-shirt, she raised her hand. When I called on her, she stood up. When she stood up, she said, Mr. Herron, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart coming to my high school and validating what me and my 4 friends have done here. I said, what have you done? She said, believe it or not, Mr. Herron, but we're the sober students in this high school. We made a decision 4 years ago when we walked in together that we'd protect each other and we would never, ever let each other do drugs or alcohol, and we've kept it and we're proud of it. When that little girl said sober student, I was so proud. I was walking up to high five and hug her. As I'm about to hug her, her whole school started laughing. I looked at the kids laughing and I said, shame on you. I looked back at the little girl who was now sitting in her seat crying. Her shining moment had crumbled. And at 35 years old, my whole approach changed to this. At 35 years old, a little light went off. Because at 35 years old, the only words that could come out of my mouth that day for that little girl was, I wish. I wish I never had to change myself. I wish on Fridays and Saturday nights I liked who I was. I wish when I was a teenager being me was enough. I wish I could hang out in my friend's basement and just be happy with who I was. I wasn't, and I knew it. I looked at that little girl and I said, I remember like it was yesterday. I remember drinking in those basements as a kid where parents told us we were safe. And I remember at the end of the night, as I was worried about curfew, at the end of the night, I would always look across the room and see my friends in high school that never drank and that never smoked. They got made fun of, laughed at, and peer pressured. But at the end of the night, as I was throwing Visine in my eyes, gum in my mouth, washing my hands so I could get past my mom, I would look across the room and I would say to myself, we can laugh at him, make fun of him, and peer pressure him. But the reality is, those kids have something we're missing. There's something special inside those kids that I don't have. They're happy with who they are. I'm not. They can go out every Friday and Saturday night and not change. I can't. And because of that one little girl's courage, we started Project Purple. Project Purple is our educational arm to the Herron Project. This year we had 500,000 kids involved. We want to be different, unique, and talk about the first day instead of the last day. You know, it's not easy doing what I do. 250 times a year, I have this thing gripped like I'm gonna drop it. Because I know how much it matters. I know the power of sharing a story. I know the difference it can make. I had no idea 5 years ago when I began that I would find my greatest strength in my struggle. that I could make a difference in people's lives, and the pain and suffering that I endured was going to be okay. One woman, Liz Mullen. One nurse, Diane Reed. And one little girl in a purple t-shirt has changed my life forever. It's an honor to do this. It's a responsibility I don't take lightly. I walked in here today and I said, what am I going to do? And then I met 7 beautiful kids who are living just like I'm living, one day at a time. Thank you all for coming. It was an honor. God bless.